fluorescent lights in the Multnomah County Victim Advocacy Center buzzed with a persistent hum that seemed to drill into Rosa Martinez's skull. She sat on an uncomfortable plastic chair, watching her daughter Emma through the observation window, a piece of one-way glass that allowed the professionals to monitor without intrusion. Emma was curled in the corner of the interview room, her knees pulled tight against her chest, arms wrapped around a tattered stuffed rabbit she'd named Coco. The rabbit had been white once. Now it was gray from years of love, and more recently from tears. 6 months. It had been 6 months since that night, and Emma hadn't spoken a single word about what she'd witnessed. Rosa closed her eyes, fighting back the wave of memories that threatened to drown her. The phone call at 11:47 p.m. The sirens. Racing to Portland General Hospital with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Finding her husband Miguel in surgery, fighting for his life after 3 gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen. And Emma, sweet, chatty, bright-eyed Emma who never stopped asking questions, sitting silent and still in a hospital playroom, covered in her father's blood. Mrs. Martinez. Detective Sarah Morrison's voice pulled Rosa back to the present. The detective was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes that had seen too much. She held a manila folder that Rosa had come to dread. "I need to be honest with you. We're running out of time." Rosa's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "The preliminary hearing is in 2 weeks." Detective Morrison sat down beside her, her voice low and urgent. "Without Emma's testimony, the DA's case is circumstantial at best. We have the surveillance footage, but the suspect's face is partially obscured by the hood. We have forensic evidence placing him at the scene, but his attorney is arguing contamination. Emma is the only witness who saw everything, who can identify Derek Thompson with absolute certainty." "But she's 7 years old," Rosa whispered, her voice breaking. "She's just a baby. How can you ask her to?" "I know," Morrison's hand found Rosa's, squeezing gently. "I know what we're asking is impossible, but if Thompson walks free—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Derek Thompson. Even the name made Rosa's blood run cold. A career criminal with a rap sheet spanning 2 states, armed robbery, aggravated assault, drug trafficking. He'd walked into Martinez family grocery on that humid July evening looking for fast cash. When Miguel refused to open the safe, Thompson had opened fire. If Emma hadn't been there doing homework in the back room, if she hadn't heard the shouting and peeked around the corner, if she hadn't seen everything through the gap in the cereal display. Miguel had survived. Barely. 3 surgeries, 2 months in the hospital, ongoing physical therapy, but he would live. That was something. That was everything. Except Emma had stopped living in any way that mattered. The girl who once narrated her entire day, who asked why the sky was blue and where dreams came from and whether dogs could see colors, that girl had vanished. In her place was this hollow, silent ghost who flinched at sudden sounds and woke up screaming 3 times a night. Through the glass, Rosa watched as Prosecutor Jennifer Lawson tried again. She'd been patient. Rosa had to give her that. Lawson was in her 40s, a career prosecutor who specialized in violent crimes. She'd seen hundreds of traumatized witnesses, but even she looked frustrated now. "Emma, honey, I know this is hard," Lawson was saying, her voice barely audible through the intercom. "But I need you to help me understand what happened that night. You don't have to say much, just a few things. Can you do that for me?" Emma's grip on Coco tightened. Her eyes, those beautiful brown eyes that used to sparkle with mischief, were fixed on a spot on the floor, somewhere far away, somewhere safer than here. "Can you tell me what you saw?" "Nothing." "Emma, did you see the man who hurt your daddy?" Emma's breathing quickened. Rosa recognized the signs immediately, the panic attack building like a storm. She stood up, ready to go to her daughter, but Detective Morrison held her back gently. "Give them another minute," Morrison urged. But Rosa knew. A mother always knows. She'd given them weeks, months, endless another minute. And every time, Emma retreated further into herself, building walls so high that Rosa feared she'd never find her way back out. In the interview room, Emma had begun to rock, back and forth, a self-soothing motion that broke Rosa's heart every time she saw it. Lawson exchanged a glance with Dr. Patricia Reeves, the child psychologist who'd been working with Emma since the beginning. Dr. Reeves shook her head slightly, a silent message. "Stop. You're pushing too hard." The prosecutor sighed and stood. "Okay, Emma, that's enough for today. You did great." But Emma hadn't done anything, and they all knew it. When they emerged from the interview room, Lawson's professional mask had slipped. She looked tired, worried, maybe even defeated. "Mrs. Martinez, she struggled for words. "I don't know what else to try. We've been gentle. We've been patient. We've had Dr. Reeves use every trauma-informed technique in the book. But if Emma can't testify..." "Can't or won't?" The question came from Marcus Webb, who had appeared in the hallway like a vulture circling. Derek Thompson's defense attorney was exactly what you'd expect: expensive suit, practiced smile, and the morals of a snake. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to coach a confused child into identifying my client." "Your client shot her father in front of her," Lawson snapped. "Allegedly." Webb's smile never wavered. "And without testimony, that remains speculation. See you in court, counselor, or, more likely, I'll see you when you're forced to drop the charges." He walked away whistling. Rosa wanted to scream. She wanted to chase after him and claw that smug expression off his face. Instead, she pulled Emma close, feeling her daughter's small body trembling against her own. "There is one more thing," Dr. Reeves said quietly, once Webb had disappeared around the corner. She pulled a brochure from her bag and handed it to Rosa. "It's unconventional and I can't promise it will work, but I've seen it help in cases like Emma's." Rosa looked down at the brochure. On the front was a photograph of a golden retriever wearing an official-looking vest. The dog's eyes were intelligent and kind. Above the photo, bold letters read, "Courthouse Dogs Foundation, helping witnesses find their voice." "A dog," Rosa looked up confused. "Not just any dog," Dr. Reeves explained. "A certified facility dog. They're specially trained to provide emotional support to traumatized witnesses during testimony. The dog would sit with Emma in court, giving her something to focus on, something to ground her when the fear becomes overwhelming." "I've never heard of such a thing," Detective Morrison said, but there was interest in her voice. "It's gaining acceptance across the country. Oregon law allows it under certain circumstances." Dr. Reeves looked directly at Rosa. "His name is Bravo. He's 3 years old and he's helped dozens of witnesses testify about the worst moments of their lives. I can arrange a meeting. No pressure, just see if Emma responds to him." Rosa looked through the window at her daughter, still rocking, still silent, still trapped in that terrible night. What did they have to lose? "Okay," Rosa heard herself say. "Set up the meeting. Let's meet this Bravo." And in that moment, none of them could have known that a dog, a simple golden retriever with knowing eyes, was about to change everything. Officer Sarah Chen had been Bravo's handler for 2 years, and in that time, she'd learned to trust the dog's instincts more than her own. As she drove through the rain-slicked streets of Portland toward the Victim Advocacy Center, Bravo sat in the passenger seat, his golden head tilted slightly as he watched the windshield wipers sweep back and forth. He always seemed to know when they were heading to work. His body language shifted, still relaxed but attentive. "Ready." "We've got a tough one today, buddy," Sarah said, reaching over to scratch behind his ears. Bravo leaned into her touch, his tail thumping once against the seat. 7-year-old girl, hasn't spoken about what she witnessed in 6 months. High-stakes case. No pressure, right? Bravo looked at her with those soulful brown eyes, and Sarah could have sworn he understood every word. She'd gotten the call from Dr. Patricia Reeves 3 days ago. Since then, Sarah had read Emma Martinez's file cover to cover, studied the police reports, reviewed the trauma assessments. The picture they painted was heartbreaking. A bright, happy child shattered by violence, locked inside herself, unable or unwilling to let anyone in. Sarah had worked with domestic violence survivors who'd been beaten within an inch of their lives. She'd sat beside sexual assault victims as they testified against their attackers. She'd watched Bravo comfort a 16-year-old boy who'd witnessed his best friend's murder. But children this young, they were different. Their trauma burrowed deeper, wrapped around their developing minds in ways that could shape the rest of their lives. And if Emma couldn't testify, the man who'd shot her father would walk free. That kind of injustice had a way of compounding trauma, making recovery nearly impossible. "No pressure at all," Sarah muttered again, pulling into the parking lot. Inside the advocacy center, Dr. Reeves was waiting. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from caring too much for too long. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Dr. Reeves said, shaking Sarah's hand. "I'll be honest, I'm not sure anything will work at this point, but Emma's mother is willing to try." "Where is she?" Sarah asked. "Room 3 with her mother. Detective Morrison is here too, and the prosecutor. They're all desperate." Dr. Reeves knelt down to Bravo's level, letting him sniff her hand. "Hey there, handsome. You ready to work some magic?" Bravo's tail wagged slowly, deliberately. Sarah always loved that about him. He never got overexcited. He seemed to understand that his job required calm, not enthusiasm. "A few ground rules before we go in," Sarah said, straightening. "Let me and Bravo enter first. Everyone else should hold back. No sudden movements, no loud voices. Bravo will assess Emma at his own pace. If he decides she's not ready, we respect that and try again another day. And most importantly, don't force interaction. Let Emma come to him when she's ready." Dr. Reeves nodded, understood. They walked down the hallway, past rooms where other victims were being interviewed, counseled, prepared for the nightmare of facing their trauma in open court. Sarah had been doing this work for 5 years, first as a victim advocate, then training to become a facility dog handler. She'd seen the justice system chew up victims and spit them out, seen how testifying could be almost as traumatic as the original crime. That's why Bravo existed. That's why she dedicated her life to this work. Outside room 3, Sarah paused. She could hear quiet sobbing, the mother probably. Through the window, she saw Emma in the same corner Dr. Reeves had described, knees to chest, clutching that worn stuffed rabbit. Sarah took a breath. "Okay, Bravo, let's go meet Emma." She opened the door slowly. Rosa Martinez looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Detective Morrison and Prosecutor Lawson stood against the wall, trying to make themselves small, non-threatening. And Emma didn't look up at all. "Hi," Sarah said softly, keeping her voice low and warm. "My name is Sarah and this is Bravo." She unclipped his leash. "He'd like to meet Emma if that's okay." Rosa opened her mouth to speak, but Sarah held up a gentle hand. "Let Bravo do his job." The golden retriever stood perfectly still for a moment, his nose working, reading the room. Sarah had watched him do this hundreds of times. He was assessing threat levels, anxiety levels, receptiveness. He could sense things humans missed: the rapid heartbeat, the shallow breathing, the chemical signature of fear and trauma that hung in the air like invisible smoke. Then with slow, deliberate steps, Bravo crossed the room. Emma's breathing changed. Sarah noticed it immediately, shorter, faster, fear response. Rosa started to stand, protective instinct kicking in, but Sarah caught her eye and shook her head slightly. "Wait." Bravo stopped 3 feet from Emma. He didn't approach further. Instead, he simply sat down and looked at her. Not staring, that would be threatening, just looking, present, available, patient. The room held its breath. 30 seconds passed. A minute, 2 minutes. Sarah had learned not to rush this. Bravo could sit there for an hour if necessary. Time meant nothing to him. Only the child mattered. Emma's rocking slowed, then stopped. Her eyes, which had been fixed on that spot on the floor, lifted slightly. She saw Bravo's paws first, then his chest, then his face. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, something Sarah had witnessed before but could never quite explain. Recognition, maybe. Not of each other, but of something deeper. Emma saw in Bravo what he was: safe, uncomplicated, incapable of hurting her, a creature who asked nothing and offered everything. Bravo's tail moved. Not a full wag, just a small sweep across the floor, an invitation. Emma's hand uncurled from around Coco. Slowly, trembling, it extended toward Bravo. The dog didn't move, didn't rush forward. He waited until her small fingers touched the top of his head. The moment they made contact, Rosa Martinez gasped, because Emma's face, that blank, traumatized mask she'd worn for 6 months, cracked, just a little, just enough to let something through. Bravo inched forward, closing the distance between them. He laid his head on Emma's lap, his full weight resting against her. Sarah had seen him do this before, applying deep pressure, using his body as an anchor to ground someone who was drowning in their own mind. Emma's other hand joined the first, both now buried in Bravo's thick golden fur. She petted him, at first tentatively, then with more confidence. Her breathing deepened, slowed, synchronized with Bravo's steady rhythm. And then Emma's lips moved. "Good boy," she whispered. The words were so quiet that Sarah almost missed them, but Rosa didn't. The mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Those were the first words Emma had spoken in weeks that weren't screams in the middle of the night. "Good boy," Emma said again, louder this time. Bravo's tail thumped against the floor. Emma's fingers traced the soft fur of his ears, explored the wet coolness of his nose, and slowly, incrementally, she began to uncurl her body. Her legs straightened. Her shoulders relaxed. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against Bravo's, and closed her eyes. Dr. Reeves wiped her own eyes. Detective Morrison looked away, jaw clenched with emotion. Even Prosecutor Lawson, who'd built a career on maintaining professional distance, had to blink back tears. Sarah knelt down, staying at Bravo's level. "Emma, my name is Sarah. Bravo really likes you." Emma looked up, really looked at Sarah for the first time. "Can he stay?" "For a little while," Sarah said gently. "And if you want, we can visit again. Would you like that?" Emma nodded, her hands never leaving Bravo's fur. "Emma," Sarah continued, keeping her tone casual, easy, "Bravo is a special kind of dog. He helps people who have been scared or hurt. He goes to court with them, sits with them while they talk about hard things. He makes them feel brave." Emma's eyes widened. "Court?" "Only if you want," Rosa interjected quickly, moving closer. "Only if you feel ready, Mija." Emma looked down at Bravo, who gazed back at her with infinite patience. "Would he sit with me?" "Right beside you," Sarah confirmed. "The whole time, I promise." For a long moment, Emma was quiet. Then she leaned down and whispered something directly into Bravo's ear. Sarah couldn't hear what she said, but Bravo's tail wagged harder. Emma looked up at her mother, then at Sarah. "Okay," she said. "I'll try if Bravo is there." The room erupted in quiet celebration. Smiles, tears, relieved laughter. But Sarah remained focused on Emma and Bravo, watching as the girl continued to pet the dog, continued to find comfort in his simple, unconditional presence. They had a long way to go. Testifying in court would be infinitely harder than this quiet room, but for the first time in 6 months, there was hope. And it came with 4 paws and a wagging tail. Marcus Webb's office occupied the top floor of a sleek glass building in downtown Portland, with panoramic views of the Willamette River and Mount Hood in the distance. The space was designed to intimidate. Modern art on the walls, leather furniture, shelves lined with law books that probably cost more than most people's cars. Webb himself sat behind a mahogany desk, his tailored suit jacket draped over the chair, sleeves rolled up as he reviewed documents with his associate. a nervous young lawyer named Kevin Tran. "They want to bring a dog into the courtroom," Webb said, his voice dangerously quiet. "A golden retriever, to sit with their star witness." Kevin looked up from his laptop. "Is that legal?" "That's exactly what we're going to argue." Webb's jaw tightened as he scanned the prosecution's motion for special accommodation. Jennifer Lawson thinks she's clever. She knows her case is weak. Surveillance footage that doesn't clearly show Derek's face, forensic evidence my experts will tear apart, and a traumatized 7-year-old who hasn't been able to testify. So now she's pulling out the emotional manipulation card. But if the child can't testify without the dog, then she can't testify, period. Webb slammed the document down. "Kevin, let me teach you something about criminal defense. The prosecution has the burden of proof, not us. If they can't present their case without resorting to courtroom theatrics, that's their problem. My job is to protect my client's right to a fair trial." Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I've read Derek Thompson's file. 3 priors for armed robbery, 2 assault charges. The evidence strongly suggests—" "I don't care what the evidence suggests," Webb interrupted sharply. "I care what the evidence proves. And right now, without that little girl's testimony, they can't prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt." He stood, packing to the window. "Do you know what a jury will see when a crying child walks into court with a sympathetic therapy dog? They'll see a victim. They'll assume my client is guilty before a single word of testimony is spoken. That dog is prejudicial, and I won't allow it." But Kevin, despite his inexperience, had a conscience that occasionally got in the way of good lawyering. What if the girl really was there? What if she really saw Thompson shoot her father? Webb turned, his expression cold. "Then she should be able to say so without a prop. The courtroom is not a petting zoo, Kevin. It's where facts are presented, where evidence is tested, where truth is supposed to emerge through rigorous examination, not emotional manipulation. That dog stays out of my courtroom." "It's not technically your courtroom, sir. It's Judge Foster's." Webb's smile was predatory. "Then let's educate Judge Foster on the law." 3 days later, Judge Marion Foster's courtroom was packed for the emergency hearing on the defense's motion to exclude Bravo. The gallery was filled with reporters, victim advocates, and legal observers who'd heard about the unusual case. Rosa Martinez sat in the front row, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Beside her, Dr. Reeves offered quiet reassurance. Emma had stayed home with her father. No need to subject her to this legal warfare. Judge Foster took the bench with her usual no-nonsense demeanor. At 62, she'd presided over some of the most difficult cases in Multnomah County. Her reputation was sterling, firm but fair, intolerant of grandstanding, and deeply knowledgeable about the law. She wore her authority like a second skin. "We're here on the defense's motion to exclude a facility dog from the courtroom during witness testimony," she announced, adjusting her reading glasses. "Mr. Webb, this is your motion. Proceed." Marcus Webb stood, buttoning his suit jacket in one smooth motion. He was in his element, commanding, confident, ready for battle. "Your Honor, this motion strikes at the heart of my client's Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial. The prosecution seeks to present a 7-year-old witness, accompanied by what they euphemistically call a facility dog. Let's be clear about what this really is: emotional manipulation of the jury." He pulled up a slide on the courtroom's display screen, a stock photo of a golden retriever with sad eyes. Studies show that people have overwhelmingly positive emotional responses to dogs, particularly golden retrievers. The presence of this animal will immediately create sympathy for the witness, prejudicing the jury against my client before any testimony is even heard. Prosecutor Jennifer Lawson remained seated, her expression neutral. She'd expected this argument. Webb continued, warming to his theme. "Furthermore, Your Honor, Oregon case law is mixed on this issue. In State v. Chenoweth, the appellate court overturned a conviction specifically because the presence of a therapy dog was deemed unduly prejudicial. The court found that the dog's presence suggested to the jury that the witness needed protection from the defendant, thereby implying guilt before any verdict was reached. Judge Foster was taking notes, her face unreadable. "The prosecution will argue that the child needs this accommodation to testify," Webb said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "But the law doesn't require that every witness be made comfortable. If a witness cannot testify under standard courtroom conditions, perhaps that testimony is not reliable enough to be presented. We cannot bend the rules of evidence and fair trial rights simply because a witness is young or traumatized." He pulled out another document. "I have here affidavits from 3 expert witnesses, psychologists and legal scholars, who will testify that the presence of comfort animals in courtrooms creates an impermissible risk of prejudice. The jury will see that dog, see that child's dependence on it, and draw conclusions that have nothing to do with the actual evidence." Webb paused for effect, making eye contact with Judge Foster. "Your Honor, my client is entitled to be tried based on facts, not feelings. He's entitled to face his accuser without that accuser being accompanied by a living, breathing symbol of victimhood. I move that the dog be excluded entirely. Let the witness testify on her own merits, or not at all." He sat down, satisfied. Judge Foster looked to the prosecution. "Ms. Lawson." Jennifer Lawson stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. She'd been a prosecutor for 20 years, and she didn't waste words. "Your Honor, Mr. Webb's argument is fundamentally dishonest. He's asking you to choose between Emma Martinez's ability to testify and his client's fair trial rights, as if those are mutually exclusive. They're not." She approached the bench, carrying a thick binder. Oregon Evidence Code specifically provides for reasonable accommodations for child witnesses under OEC 40.46. The statute recognizes that children who have been traumatized may need support to provide testimony. This isn't about comfort, Your Honor. It's about access to justice. Lawson opened the binder, pointing to highlighted sections. Facility dogs have been permitted in courts across the country: Washington, California, New York, Arizona. In every case where proper protocols were followed, appellate courts have upheld their use. The key is minimizing prejudice while allowing testimony to occur. "And how do you propose to minimize that prejudice?" Judge Foster asked. "Several ways, Your Honor. First, the dog will be positioned at the witness's feet, largely out of the jury's direct view. Second, we will not mention or reference the dog during testimony. Third, you can instruct the jury explicitly that the dog's presence is a neutral accommodation, similar to allowing a witness to testify via closed-circuit television, and should not influence their verdict in any way." Lawson's voice grew more passionate. "Your Honor, Emma Martinez watched her father get shot 3 times at point-blank range. She was 6 years old at the time. That trauma has rendered her unable to speak about what she witnessed, not because she's lying, not because her testimony isn't reliable, but because the psychological impact is so severe that she literally cannot access those memories without support." She turned slightly, acknowledging Rosa in the gallery. "Without Bravo, there is no testimony. And without testimony, a man who violently attacked a family in their own business walks free. That's not justice. That's a system that prioritizes legal technicalities over truth." "Are you suggesting the rules of evidence are mere technicalities?" Webb interjected from his seat. "I'm suggesting," Lawson shot back, "that the rules of evidence were designed to serve justice, not obstruct it." Judge Foster held up a hand. "That's enough. Both of you make compelling points, which is why this issue has divided courts across the country." She removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Mr. Webb, your concerns about prejudice are legitimate. Ms. Lawson, your concerns about witness access are equally legitimate. The question is whether there's a way to balance both interests." She paused, thinking. The courtroom was silent except for the scratching of the court reporter's keys. "Here's what I'm going to do," Judge Foster finally said. I'm going to meet with Emma Martinez and this dog myself. In chambers. Informally. No attorneys present, no pressure. I want to see firsthand what we're talking about, whether this child genuinely needs this accommodation or whether, as Mr. Webb suggests, this is prosecutorial theater. Webb started to object, but Judge Foster cut him off with a look. After that meeting, I'll make my ruling. We'll reconvene in 3 days. And gentlemen, lady, whoever loses this motion, I promise you my decision will be legally sound and appealable if necessary. This court takes both fair trial rights and victim rights seriously. She brought down her gavel. We're adjourned. As people filed out, Rosa Martinez caught Jennifer Lawson's arm. What does this mean? Will Emma have to testify without Bravo? Lawson's expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes betrayed her concern. I don't know. Judge Foster is fair, but she's also conservative in her rulings. We'll know in 3 days. Outside the courthouse, Marcus Webb gave a statement to the waiting cameras. Justice requires that trials be conducted fairly, without emotional manipulation. We're confident Judge Foster will see through this obvious attempt to prejudice the jury. But inside, Kevin Tran couldn't shake the image of Rosa Martinez's face. The fear, the desperation, the hope that was slowly dying. Did we just win? Kevin asked as they walked to the parking garage. Webb smiled. We're about to. Judge Marion Foster's chambers smelled like leather, old books, and the faint hint of jasmine from the candle her daughter had given her last Christmas. It was Thursday afternoon, and the judge sat at her desk reviewing case files, but her mind kept drifting to the meeting scheduled for 2 p.m. In 25 years on the bench, she'd never invited a dog into her chambers. Then again, she'd never faced a case quite like this one. Her law clerk James knocked softly. Judge, they're here. Emma Martinez, her mother, Officer Chen with the facility dog, and Dr. Reeves. Marion took a breath, closing the file in front of her. Send them in, and James, hold all my calls, no interruptions. Yes, ma'am. She stood, smoothing her judicial robe, then reconsidered and removed it, hanging it on the coat rack. This wasn't a formal hearing. This was a grandmother trying to understand how to help a traumatized child while upholding the law she'd sworn to protect. The door opened, and Rosa Martinez entered first, her hand firmly gripping Emma's. The little girl was even smaller than Marion had imagined, a tiny thing in a yellow sundress with her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her eyes were downcast, and she clutched that worn stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. Behind them came Officer Sarah Chen, and beside her walked Bravo. Marion had seen photographs, but they hadn't captured the dog's presence. He moved with purpose and grace, his intelligent eyes scanning the room, assessing. When his gaze landed on Marion, she felt oddly evaluated, and apparently approved because his tail gave a small wag. Mrs. Martinez, Emma, please come in, Marion said warmly, gesturing to the comfortable chairs she'd arranged in a semicircle away from her imposing desk. Officer Chen, Dr. Reeves, thank you for coming. Thank you for seeing us, Your Honor, Rosa said, her voice tight with nerves. Please, in here you can call me Judge Marion. She smiled at Emma, who still hadn't looked up. And you must be Emma. I've heard a lot about you. Emma's grip on Coco tightened, but she said nothing. Marion had raised 3 children and now had 5 grandchildren. She knew when to push and when to wait. She settled into her chair, deliberately keeping her body language open and relaxed. Emma, I have some books over on that shelf if you'd like to look at them, and there are some colored pencils and paper on the table. Feel free to draw if you want. Marion's voice was gentle, grandmotherly. Bravo, you're welcome to explore too. Sarah gave Bravo a subtle hand signal, and the dog began a slow tour of the chambers, sniffing politely, giving Emma space. Marion watched the girl's eyes track the dog's movement, even as her body remained rigid. Mrs. Martinez, Dr. Reeves told me Emma has been doing better since meeting Bravo, Marion said conversationally. Rosa nodded eagerly. Yes, Your Honor, Judge Marion. She's been sleeping better, eating more. She even talked to her father on the phone last night, just for a minute, but her voice caught. It's the most progress we've seen. That's wonderful, Marion meant it. She pulled out a small photo album from her desk drawer. Emma, would you like to see pictures of my grandchildren? This is Sophie, she's 8, just a year older than you. And this is Marcus, he's 5, that's baby Hannah. Slowly, Emma's eyes lifted. She glanced at the photos, and Marion saw a flicker of interest. Sophie loves to draw. She's always making pictures of unicorns and rainbows. Marion held out the album. Would you like to see? Emma hesitated, then released her mother's hand long enough to take the album. She sat down on the floor. Children were always more comfortable on the floor, and began turning pages. Bravo, sensing the shift, moved closer and settled down about 3 feet away from her. Not crowding, just present. Marion gave it a few minutes, chatting quietly with Rosa and Dr. Reeves about neutral topics, the weather, the traffic, anything to normalize the atmosphere. Then, when Emma seemed absorbed in the photos, Marion shifted her approach. Emma, she said softly, I need to tell you why I asked you to come here today. Is that okay? Emma looked up, her brown eyes wide and wary, but she nodded. I'm a judge. That means my job is to make sure that when people go to court, everything is fair for everyone. Marion chose her words carefully. Officer Chen told me that Bravo helps you feel safe. Is that true? Another nod. I'm trying to decide if Bravo can come to court with you. Some people think it's a good idea. Some people think it's not. But I wanted to meet both of you myself so I could understand better. Emma's breathing quickened slightly. Bravo's head lifted, his eyes fixing on her. Marion noticed the dog's incredible awareness. He'd been lying calmly, but the moment Emma's stress level rose, he was alert. Emma, honey, Marion continued, keeping her voice steady and warm, I need to ask you about something hard. You don't have to answer if you're not ready, but I need to understand what happened at your daddy's store. The change was instantaneous. Emma's face went pale. Her hands began to shake. The photo album slipped from her fingers. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, the beginning of a panic attack. Rosa moved to intervene, but Marion held up a gentle hand. Wait, let's see what happens. Bravo didn't wait. He rose smoothly and crossed the distance to Emma in 3 strides. Without any command from Sarah, he placed his head directly on Emma's lap, his full weight pressing against her legs. It was called deep pressure therapy. Marion had read about it in the briefing materials, and watching it in action was remarkable. Emma's shaking hands found Bravo's fur. Her fingers dug in, gripping, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Bravo didn't move, didn't pull away. He simply stood there, a warm, steady anchor. Breathe with him, Emma, Sarah said quietly from her corner. Feel him breathing, match your breath to his. Emma's chest rose and fell erratically but slowly, so slowly it began to synchronize with Bravo's steady rhythm. In, out, in, out. The color started returning to her face. Marion felt her throat tighten. She'd seen expert witnesses testify, seen trauma specialists explain PTSD, read countless studies. But watching this small child literally use a dog as a lifeline to stay present, that was something else entirely. Emma, Marion tried again, even more gently. I know it's scary, but can you tell me anything about that night, even just a little bit? Emma's eyes squeezed shut. Her mouth opened, then closed. Tears leaked from beneath her lashes. He had a gun, Emma whispered, so quietly Marion almost missed it. A black gun, and he yelled at Daddy, said bad words. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Reeves was writing notes but also wiping her eyes. You're doing so well, Emma, Marion encouraged. Is there anything else you remember? Emma's whole body was trembling now, but Bravo pressed harder against her, grounding her. Daddy said no. He said to leave us alone, But the man got mad. He pointed the gun and her breath hitched. The panic was rising again, threatening to overwhelm her. "And then what happened?" Marion asked, though she knew she was pushing. "Loud," Emma cried out, her eyes flying open. "So loud. And Daddy fell down and there was red everywhere and I wanted to help but I was so scared and the man looked at me. He looked right at me and his eyes were mean and—" She couldn't continue. The words dissolved into sobs. But Bravo was there, pressing against her, and Emma wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his fur. Marion sat back, her own eyes burning with unshed tears. She'd gotten her answer. Without Bravo, Emma couldn't access those memories. They were too painful, too overwhelming. But with him, she could walk to the edge of that darkness and speak its name. The room was silent except for Emma's crying, and the soft sound of Rosa murmuring comfort to her daughter. Finally, Marion spoke. "Emma, look at me, sweetheart." Emma lifted her tear-stained face. "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met," Marion said, and she meant every word. "What you just did, talking about that scary night, that took more courage than anything I've ever seen in my courtroom. Do you understand that?" Emma shook her head. "I'm not brave, I was hiding. I didn't help Daddy." "Oh, honey." Marion got down on her knees, bringing herself to Emma's level. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the hard thing even when you are scared. And you just did that." Emma looked at Bravo, then back at Marion. "Can he really come with me to court?" Marion glanced at Sarah, at Dr. Reeves, at Rosa's desperate, hopeful face. Then she looked back at Emma and Bravo, this child and this extraordinary dog who together formed something stronger than either could be alone. "Yes," Marion said, making her decision in that moment. "Yes, Emma, Bravo can come with you, I promise." Emma's arms tightened around Bravo's neck. "Thank you," she whispered. And in that quiet moment, in chambers far from the formal courtroom, Judge Marion Foster understood something profound. Sometimes justice required compassion, and sometimes the law had to bend to protect the truth. The courtroom was packed the following Monday morning. Word had spread about the unusual case, the traumatized child, the facility dog, the legal battle over accommodation versus prejudice. Reporters filled the back rows, their notebooks ready. Victim advocates sat alongside legal scholars who'd come to observe what could become precedent-setting case law. The air hummed with anticipation. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table, his expression confident. He'd spent the weekend researching appellate decisions, preparing for every possible outcome. Beside him, Derek Thompson wore a suit that made him look almost respectable, though his cold eyes betrayed the violence in his past. Webb had coached him. Look sympathetic, don't smirk, show no emotion. The jury wasn't here yet, but everyone else was watching. At the prosecution table, Jennifer Lawson appeared calm, but her pen tapped an anxious rhythm against her legal pad. Sarah Chen sat in the gallery with Bravo at her feet, the dog's vest marking him as a working animal. Rosa Martinez clutched a rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. "All rise," the Honorable Judge Marion Foster presiding. Everyone stood as Marion entered, her black robe flowing behind her. She'd barely slept since that meeting in her chambers 3 days ago. Emma's face haunted her, the terror, the tears, the way she'd clung to Bravo like he was the only thing keeping her from drowning. But Marion had also spent those sleepless nights reviewing case law, weighing competing interests, considering the implications of her decision. This wasn't just about one case. It was about setting a standard that could affect countless future cases across Oregon, maybe across the country. She took her seat, looking out at the assembled crowd. "Please be seated," she said, her voice carrying authority. "We're here for my ruling on the defense's motion to exclude a facility dog from the courtroom during witness testimony. I've reviewed the briefs, heard arguments from both counsel, and conducted my own assessment of the witness and the dog in question." Marcus Webb straightened, ready to respond to whatever came next. Let me begin by saying that both Mr. Webb and Ms. Lawson raised valid concerns. This is not a simple issue with a clear answer. Marion paused, gathering her thoughts. The defense is correct that the Sixth Amendment guarantees every defendant the right to a fair trial. That right is fundamental and cannot be compromised. The presence of anything in a courtroom that might prejudice a jury against a defendant must be carefully scrutinized. Webb allowed himself a small smile. This was going his way. However, Marion continued, and that single word shifted the energy in the room, the prosecution is equally correct that Oregon law recognizes the need for reasonable accommodations for vulnerable witnesses, particularly children who have experienced trauma. OEC 40.46 specifically provides courts with discretion to implement measures that allow traumatized witnesses to testify. Lawson's pen stopped tapping. I've reviewed cases from multiple jurisdictions. The outcomes are mixed, which tells me this is an evolving area of law where courts are still finding balance. Marion pulled out her notes. In State v. Dye, the Washington Supreme Court upheld the use of a facility dog, finding that proper jury instructions and positioning minimized prejudice. In People v. Spence, California's appellate court agreed. However, as Mr. Webb correctly noted, Oregon's own appellate court in State v. Chenoweth expressed concern about potential prejudice. The room was silent. Every word mattered. What distinguishes this case from Chenoweth is the specific circumstance before us. In Chenoweth, the witness was an adult who had alternative means of managing anxiety. Here, we have a 7-year-old child who has been unable to provide testimony through any other means. Marion's voice grew firmer. I have personally observed Emma Martinez. Without the facility dog, she cannot access the memories necessary for testimony. With the dog, she can. That is not a matter of comfort. That is a matter of access to justice. Rosa's hands clutched the rosary tighter, hope rising in her chest. However, Marion continued, looking directly at Webb, the defense's concerns about potential prejudice are legitimate and must be addressed. Therefore, I am granting the prosecution's request to allow the facility dog, Bravo, to be present during Emma Martinez's testimony, subject to the following conditions. She read from her prepared order, her voice clear and deliberate. First, the dog will be positioned at the witness's feet, below the line of sight of the jury box. While the jury will be aware of the dog's presence, he will not be prominently displayed. Sarah Chen nodded. That was standard protocol. Second, neither the prosecution nor the defense will mention, reference, or draw attention to the dog during testimony. No questions about the dog, no comments about the dog, no gestures toward the dog. The dog's presence will be treated as functionally invisible to the proceedings. Lawson made a note. That was expected. Third, I will provide explicit jury instructions both before and after the witness testimony. I will instruct the jury that the presence of the facility dog is a neutral accommodation, similar to allowing closed-circuit testimony or having a support person present. I will explicitly tell them that the dog's presence should not influence their verdict in any way, and that they must not draw any negative inferences about the defendant based on this accommodation. Marcus Webb's jaw tightened. He'd hoped for exclusion, but if this was the ruling, those jury instructions might be his strongest protection on appeal. Fourth, the dog and his handler, Officer Chen, will be subject to my approval. I've met Bravo and observed his behavior. He is calm, well-trained, and non-disruptive. He will maintain that demeanor during testimony, or he will be removed from the courtroom. Marion looked up from her notes, making eye contact with both attorneys. Fifth, this ruling applies only to the testimony of Emma Martinez. It does not set a blanket policy for all future witnesses. Each request for accommodation will be evaluated on its individual merits. She set down the paper, removing her glasses. Mr. Webb, I understand you may disagree with this ruling. For the record, I want to be clear about my reasoning. The Oregon Evidence Code gives me discretion to implement reasonable accommodations for child witnesses. The Oregon Constitution requires that I balance the defendant's right to a fair trial against the witness's ability to testify. I find that, with the conditions I've outlined, both interests can be protected. Webb stood. Your Honor, for the record, the defense objects to this ruling and preserves all rights to appeal. Your objection is noted and will be part of the record, Marion acknowledged. Ms. Lawson. Lawson stood, her voice steady despite the emotion she was holding back. Thank you, Your Honor. The state believes this ruling appropriately balances all interests. Marion nodded. Then let's discuss trial scheduling. Ms. Lawson, when do you intend to call Emma Martinez? Day 2 of trial, Your Honor, after we present the surveillance footage and forensic evidence. Very well. Jury selection will begin next Monday. Trial will commence the following Tuesday. Marion looked at the calendar. Mr. Webb, I assume you'll need time to prepare your cross-examination given this ruling. I'll be ready, Your Honor, Webb said, though his tone suggested he was already planning his appeal strategy. I'm sure you will. Marion's gaze swept the courtroom. Let me say something to everyone present. This case involves a violent crime against a family. It involves a traumatized child. It involves complex legal questions about fairness and access to justice. I expect everyone, attorneys, witnesses, observers, to conduct themselves with professionalism and respect. She paused, her expression serious. This little girl has already been through hell. I will not tolerate anything that causes her additional trauma. At the same time, Mr. Thompson is entitled to a vigorous defense and a fair trial. I intend to ensure both things happen. Marion brought down her gavel. We're adjourned until jury selection next Monday. As people began to file out, Rosa Martinez rushed to Jennifer Lawson, tears streaming down her face. Thank you so much. Lawson embraced her. Thank Judge Foster, she made the tough call. Across the aisle, Marcus Webb packed his briefcase with sharp, angry movements. Derek Thompson leaned over. What does this mean? It means, Webb said quietly, that we're going to trial with a sympathetic child and her emotional support dog. It means the jury is going to hate you before you even open your mouth. And it means, he looked his client in the eye, you'd better hope I'm a damn good lawyer. In the gallery, Sarah Chen knelt beside Bravo, stroking his ears. Good boy, she whispered. We're going to court, buddy. Time to do what you do best. Bravo's tail wagged once, as if he understood the weight of what was coming. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed both attorneys. Webb gave his statement with practiced ease. We believe Judge Foster erred in allowing this prejudicial element into the courtroom. We will be closely monitoring for any grounds for appeal. But when Lawson faced the cameras, she said only this. Today, justice took a step forward. A traumatized child will have the support she needs to tell the truth. That's what our legal system is supposed to do. In a small apartment across town, Miguel Martinez held his daughter as Rosa called with the news. Emma listened on speakerphone, Bravo's photo clutched in her hand. Did you hear that, Mija? Rosa said, her voice breaking with relief. Bravo can come with you. Judge Marion said yes. Emma looked at her father, whose eyes were filled with tears. Then she looked at the photo of the golden dog who had given her back her voice. I can do it, Emma whispered. With Bravo, I can do it. And for the first time since that terrible night, Miguel Martinez believed that maybe, just maybe, they were all going to be okay. The morning of Emma's testimony arrived with gray skies and cold rain, the kind of Portland weather that made everything feel heavier, more ominous. Rosa had barely slept, spending most of the night sitting in Emma's room, watching her daughter toss and turn, whimpering in her sleep. At 5 a.m., she'd finally given up on rest entirely and started making breakfast that neither of them would eat. Miguel sat at the kitchen table in his wheelchair, his body still recovering from the shooting 8 months ago. Physical therapy had helped, but he'd never be the same. 3 bullets had seen to that. Still, he insisted on being there today. His daughter needed to see his face, needed to know he was proud of her. "Mija, come eat something," Rosa pleaded, setting down a plate of eggs and toast. Emma sat on the couch in her carefully chosen outfit, a navy blue dress with white flowers that her abuela had sent from Mexico, white tights, and her nicest shoes. She looked like she was going to a funeral. Her hands twisted Coco the rabbit over and over, the stuffed animal's ears nearly threadbare from anxious fingers. "I can't," Emma whispered. "My stomach hurts." Rosa exchanged a worried glance with Miguel. They'd known this would be hard, but seeing Emma's face, pale and terrified, made Rosa want to call the whole thing off. To hell with justice. To hell with the trial. Her baby was suffering. "Emma, look at me," Miguel said, wheeling closer. His voice was gentle but firm. "Do you remember what I told you about being brave?" Emma nodded, tears already forming in her eyes. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the hard thing even when you're terrified." He took her small hand in his larger, scarred one. "Today is going to be hard, the hardest thing you've ever done, but you don't have to do it alone. Bravo will be there, Mama will be there, I will be there. And most importantly," he touched her chest gently, "you have strength in here that you don't even know about yet." "What if I forget what to say?" Emma's voice cracked. "What if I look at him and I can't talk?" "Then you look at Bravo instead," Rosa said, kneeling beside her. "You look at that beautiful dog and you let him remind you that you're safe, that you're protected, that nothing can hurt you in that courtroom." But Emma knew better. The man who shot her father would be sitting right there. Those cold eyes would be staring at her, and she'd have to point at him, identify him, relive the worst night of her life in front of strangers. At the courthouse, Sarah Chen was doing final preparations with Bravo in a quiet room reserved for them. She'd brushed his coat until it gleamed, checked his vest 3 times, and gone through their commands repeatedly. Bravo sat patiently through it all, as if he understood the gravity of what they were about to do. "Big day, buddy," Sarah murmured, stroking his ears. "The biggest yet. That little girl is going to need every ounce of your training, every bit of your magic. Can you do this?" Bravo's tail thumped once against the floor. In his brown eyes, Sarah saw what she always saw, unwavering commitment. He was born for this work, trained for this work, and he would not fail. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Jennifer Lawson entered, looking polished and professional in her charcoal suit, but Sarah could see the tension in her shoulders. "How is she?" Sarah asked. "Not good," Lawson admitted. "I just spoke with Rosa. Emma's barely keeping it together. She's asking if she can back out." Sarah's heart sank. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that she can, that no one will force her, but that if she doesn't testify—" Lawson didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what it meant. Derek Thompson would walk free. "Where is she now?" "In the victim witness room with her parents. Dr. Reeves is with them." Lawson checked her watch. "We go live in 30 minutes. Sarah, if Emma can't do this." "She can," Sarah interrupted firmly. "With Bravo she can, trust me." But even as she said it, Sarah felt the weight of uncertainty. She'd worked with dozens of traumatized witnesses, but never a child this young, never stakes this high, never a case where one small voice could be the difference between justice and failure. In the victim witness room, Emma had curled into a ball on the couch, her breathing rapid and shallow. Dr. Reeves knelt beside her, speaking in low, soothing tones, trying to guide her through a grounding exercise. But Emma was spiraling, panic overtaking reason. I can't," she repeated like a mantra. The door opened, and Sarah entered with Bravo. The moment Emma heard the click of dog nails on the floor, her head lifted. Bravo crossed the room in 4 strides and immediately placed his head on Emma's lap, his weight solid and reassuring. Emma's hands found his fur, gripping tight. Her breathing was still erratic, but the spiral slowed. "Hi, Emma," Sarah said softly, sitting on the floor beside them. "Bravo missed you. He's been waiting to see you." "I'm scared," Emma whispered into Bravo's fur. "I know, being scared is okay. Bravo gets scared sometimes too." Emma looked up surprised. "Really?" "Really? Loud noises scare him, thunderstorms, but you know what he does when he's scared." Sarah stroked Bravo's back. "He remembers his training, he remembers he has a job to do, and he does it anyway." Emma buried her face back in Bravo's neck. "What if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing?" "There is no wrong thing," Jennifer Lawson said, entering the room and kneeling on Emma's other side. "All you have to do is tell the truth. Tell what you saw, that's it. No one expects you to be perfect." "What if he gets mad?" Emma's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The man, what if he gets mad like he did at Daddy?" Rosa moved forward, but Sarah held up a hand. "Let me handle this." "Emma, look at me," Sarah said firmly. The girl's tear-stained face turned toward her. "That man cannot hurt you. There are police officers in that courtroom. Judge Foster is there. Your parents are there. And Bravo," she gestured to the dog, "Bravo will be right next to you every single second. He won't leave your side, I promise." "What if I freeze? What if I can't talk?" "Then you take a breath, you pet Bravo, you look at him until you feel steady again. Judge Foster will give you time. No one is going to rush you." Sarah's voice was calm, confident, even though her own heart was racing. "Emma, you've already done the hardest part. You've already told the story once in Judge Foster's chambers. This is just doing it again." But Emma shook her head. That was different, he wasn't there. And there it was, the real fear. Not the courtroom, not the questions, not the strangers watching. Derek Thompson, the monster from her nightmares. The man whose face she saw every time she closed her eyes. Miguel wheeled forward. "Emma, look at your old papa." She did, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "That man tried to destroy our family. He tried to take me away from you. But he failed, Mija. I'm still here. We're still here. And now," his voice grew stronger, "now you have the chance to make sure he can never hurt another family. You have power today. You get to use your voice as a weapon against him." The door opened again and the bailiff appeared. "They're ready for her." Emma's whole body went rigid. This was it. No more delays, no more preparation. It was time. Sarah stood, offering Emma her hand. "We can do this together. You, me, and Bravo. Ready." Emma looked at her mother, who had tears streaming down her face. She looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly despite his own fear. She looked at Dr. Reeves, who gave her a thumbs up. And finally, she looked down at Bravo, whose brown eyes gazed back at her with absolute trust. "Okay," Emma whispered, "I'm ready." But as she stood on trembling legs, as Sarah attached Bravo's leash and they moved toward the door, Emma's voice came out small and broken. "I'm not brave enough for this." Sarah stopped, kneeling down one last time. "Emma Martinez, you are the bravest person I have ever known, and in about 5 minutes you're going to prove it." They walked down the hallway, Emma's hand gripping Sarah's, Bravo walking steadily between them. Behind them, Rosa and Miguel followed, Rosa's rosary clutched in white-knuckled hands, Miguel's wheelchair squeaking softly on the polished floor. At the courtroom doors, Emma stopped. Through the small window she could see people, so many people, jurors, reporters, attorneys, and at the defense table Derek Thompson looking right at the door as if he could sense her approach. Their eyes met through the glass. Emma's breathing stopped. "I can't," she said, backing away. "I can't go in there, please don't make me." And then Bravo did something remarkable. He turned, placed both front paws on Emma's chest, a move he'd been trained for exactly this moment, and touched his nose to hers, his warm breath on her face, his solid weight grounding her to earth. Emma's arms wrapped around his neck. The bailiff opened the door. "Emma Martinez to the witness stand." His voice echoed into the courtroom. Sarah looked at Emma, Emma looked at Bravo, and Bravo looked back at her with eyes that said, "I'm here, you can do this." Emma took one step forward, then another, and with Bravo at her side, she walked into the courtroom to face her nightmare. The courtroom fell into complete silence as Emma entered. Every eye tracked the small girl in the navy blue dress and the golden retriever walking steadily beside her. Jurors who had been shuffling papers stopped. The court reporter's fingers froze above her keys. Even Derek Thompson, who'd maintained an impassive expression throughout the trial, shifted slightly in his chair. Emma's legs felt like water. The room seemed enormous, the ceiling impossibly high, the walls too far away, the distance to the witness stand stretching like a mile. She could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, drowning out everything else. But Bravo walked beside her, his presence steady and sure, and somehow her feet kept moving. Judge Marion Foster watched from the bench, her expression gentle but unreadable. She'd seen Emma in her chambers, small, terrified, barely able to speak. Now she was seeing her walk into a packed courtroom to face the man who'd nearly killed her father. The judge's hand tightened around her gavel. "Emma, you can go ahead and sit in the witness chair," the bailiff said kindly, gesturing to the wooden box beside the judge's bench. Emma looked up. The witness chair seemed impossibly tall for someone her size. Her hands shook as she climbed the 2 steps, nearly tripping on the last one. She settled into the seat, her feet dangling several inches above the floor, making her feel even smaller. Bravo didn't hesitate. As Sarah had trained him, he moved into position at Emma's feet, settling down with his body pressed against the wooden panel so Emma could feel his warmth. She immediately dropped one hand down, her fingers finding his soft fur, anchoring herself. The bailiff approached with a children's book. "Emma, do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "Yes," Emma whispered, so quietly that several jurors leaned forward to hear. "You'll need to speak up, sweetie," the bailiff said gently. "Can you say that a little louder?" Emma's throat felt closed. She couldn't get air, couldn't make sound. Panic was rising again, threatening to swallow her whole. Her hand tightened in Bravo's fur and the dog responded immediately, pressing harder against her leg. She felt his steady breathing, his calm presence. "Yes," she said again, louder this time. "I promise." Jennifer Lawson stood, smoothing her jacket. She'd prosecuted hundreds of cases, questioned thousands of witnesses, but her hands were trembling as she approached Emma. Everything hinged on the next 30 minutes. "Good morning, Emma. My name is Ms. Lawson. We've met before, remember?" Emma nodded, still not making eye contact. "I'm going to ask you some questions, and all you need to do is answer them honestly. If you don't understand something, just tell me, okay? And if you need a break at any time, you just let Judge Foster know. Does that sound okay?" Another nod. "Emma, I need you to use words, honey. The court reporter can't write down a head nod." "Okay," Emma said softly. "Good, thank you." Lawson's voice was warm, encouraging. "Can you tell us how old you are?" 7. "And where do you go to school?" "Richmond Elementary." "What grade?" "Second grade." The questions were simple, designed to ease Emma into speaking, to build her confidence. In the jury box, several jurors smiled gently. One woman in the back row was already wiping her eyes. "Emma, do you know why you're here today?" Emma's breathing changed. Her hand moved down to Bravo again. "To talk about what happened at my daddy's store." "That's right, and I know that's really hard, but you're doing great." Lawson took a small step closer. "Can you tell us what your daddy's store is called?" "Martinez Family Grocery, on Foster Street." "And were you there on July 17th of last year?" Emma's eyes closed briefly. When she opened them, they were shining with tears. "Yes." "What were you doing there?" "Homework. I was doing my math homework in the back room, at the little table." "And what happened while you were doing homework?" Emma's chest began to rise and fall rapidly. The color drained from her face. Her whole body started to shake. Judge Foster leaned forward. "Emma, take your time, there's no rush." Emma looked down at Bravo. The dog gazed back at her with those knowing brown eyes. She stroked his head, feeling his solid warmth, his unshakable calm. Seconds passed. The courtroom waited. "I heard yelling," Emma finally said, her voice trembling. "A man's voice, not Daddy's, someone else." "What did you do when you heard yelling?" "I got scared. I went to look. There's a gap," she gestured vaguely, "between the cereal boxes. I could see through." "And what did you see?" "A man. He had a black hood on his head, a black jacket, and he was pointing," her voice broke. "He was pointing a gun at my daddy." In the gallery, Rosa pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Miguel sat rigid in his wheelchair, tears running down his face. "What was your daddy doing?" "He was behind the counter. His hands were up. He was saying, 'Please, please, I have a daughter, please don't do this.'" Emma's words came faster now, tumbling out. "And the man said bad words. He said to open the safe, but Daddy said he couldn't, it was on a timer, it wouldn't open until morning." "What happened next?" Emma's entire body was trembling now. Bravo stood up, pressing his full weight against her legs, using his body to ground her. Emma's hands buried themselves in his fur, holding on like he was the only thing keeping her from flying apart. The man got really mad. He yelled more. And Daddy tried to grab his phone to call 911, and then, her voice rose to a near wail, and then the gun was so loud, 3 times, bang, 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 and Daddy fell down and there was blood, so much blood on the floor, and I wanted to help him, but I was too scared to move. "It's okay, Emma, you're safe now, you're doing so well." Lawson's own voice was thick with emotion. "Emma, I need to ask you something very important. Do you see the man who shot your daddy in this courtroom today?" This was the moment. Everything led to this. Emma's eyes lifted from Bravo and swept across the courtroom. They passed over the jury, over the gallery, over her parents, and then they landed on the defense table. On Derek Thompson. He sat perfectly still, his attorney's hand on his arm, probably a warning not to react. But his eyes met Emma's, and in them was the same coldness she remembered from that terrible night. Emma's breathing stopped. Her vision tunneled. For a moment she was back behind those cereal boxes, watching her father's blood pool on the linoleum, seeing those merciless eyes scan the store. Bravo whined softly, breaking through her paralysis. His nose nudged her hand. Emma sucked in air, found her voice, and lifted one shaking finger to point directly at Derek Thompson. "Him," she said, her voice cracking but clear. "That's him, the man who shot my daddy." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Foster's gavel came down once. Order. Thompson's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. Anger, or maybe fear that his carefully constructed defense was crumbling. "Let the record show," Lawson said formally, "that the witness has identified the defendant, Derek Thompson." She paused. "Emma, are you absolutely certain?" "Yes," Emma's voice was stronger now. "I saw his face when the hood slipped, when he bent down. I saw his eyes. I'll never forget his eyes." Marcus Webb stood for cross-examination, his approach careful, measured. He knew the jury was watching, knew that one wrong move would make him look like a monster attacking a traumatized child. "Emma, I know this is difficult, but I have just a few questions." His voice was gentle, almost grandfatherly. "You said the man wore a black hood, correct?" "Yes." "And you were hiding behind cereal boxes?" "Yes." "Was it dark in the store?" "A little. The big lights were off. Just the counter light was on." "So you were scared, hiding, it was dim, and the man had a hood. Is it possible you didn't see his face as clearly as you think?" Emma's hand tightened in Bravo's fur, but her voice didn't waver. "I saw him. When the hood moved, I saw his whole face." "For how long?" "I don't know, maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds in a dark, scary moment. Emma, is it possible your memory is confused?" "No." Emma's voice grew louder, fueled by something that had been building inside her for months. I see his face every night when I try to sleep. I see it when I close my eyes. I saw him look right at where I was hiding, and his eyes were mean and cold, and I knew, her voice cracked. I knew if he saw me, he'd shoot me too. Webb paused, realizing he'd given her strength instead of breaking her down. No further questions, Your Honor. Redirect, Judge Foster asked Lawson. Just one question. Lawson approached Emma again. Emma, despite how scary this was, despite everything you've been through, why did you decide to come here today and testify? Emma looked at Bravo, then at her father in the wheelchair, then back at the jury. Because he hurt my family, and he might hurt someone else's family if I don't tell the truth. And Daddy always says, her voice broke completely, Daddy always says the Martinez family doesn't run from hard things. We face them. There wasn't a dry eye in the jury box. Thank you, Emma, Judge Foster said softly. You may step down. Emma sat frozen in the witness chair, her hands still buried in Bravo's fur, barely comprehending that it was over. She'd done it. She'd spoken. She'd pointed at the man who haunted her nightmares and said the words that needed to be said. The worst 45 minutes of her life were behind her. You may step down, Emma, Judge Marion Foster repeated gently, her voice warm with something that sounded like pride. Sarah Chen appeared at the witness stand, offering Emma her hand. Come on, sweetheart, let's go back to your mom and dad. Emma climbed down from the chair, her legs wobbling like a newborn foal. Bravo stood immediately, pressing against her side, steadying her. She should have walked straight down the aisle to where her mother waited with open arms, tears streaming down Rosa's face. That was the plan. That was what everyone expected. But something made Emma stop. She stood there in the well of the courtroom between the witness stand and the judge's bench and looked up at Judge Marion Foster. This woman, this powerful, intimidating figure in the black robe, had made all of this possible. Without her decision to allow Bravo, Emma would still be silent, still trapped in her nightmare, still unable to give her father justice. Before Sarah could guide her away, before anyone could stop her, Emma did something no one expected. She walked directly toward the judge's bench. The bailiff tensed, taking a step forward. This wasn't protocol. Witnesses didn't approach the bench, but Judge Foster raised her hand slightly, a small gesture that froze everyone in place. Wait. Emma stopped at the base of the bench, having to tilt her head back to look up at the judge. Bravo stood beside her, his tail wagging slowly, sensing this was important. The entire courtroom held its breath, 12 jurors, 2 attorneys, a defendant, a court reporter, a packed gallery of observers, all watching this tiny girl in her navy blue dress. For a moment, Emma just looked at Judge Foster, gathering her courage one last time. The judge leaned forward slightly, her expression open, waiting. And then Emma spoke, her voice ringing clear and pure in the silent courtroom. Thank you for letting him stay with me. The simple words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward through every person present. Judge Marion Foster, who had sentenced murderers without flinching, who had presided over the most horrific cases imaginable, who had maintained professional composure through child abuse testimonies and domestic violence horrors, who had built a reputation on being firm, fair, and unshakable, felt something crack in her chest. Emma continued, her small voice carrying weight beyond her years. I was so scared. I didn't think I could do it. But Bravo, she looked down at the golden dog who gazed back at her with devotion. He made me feel brave. He made me remember that even when I'm scared, I can still do the right thing. Judge Foster's vision blurred. She removed her glasses with a trembling hand, pressing her fingers to the bridge of her nose, but the tears came anyway. In 25 years on the bench, through hundreds of heart-wrenching cases, she had never broken. Not once. Not publicly. But this child, this impossibly courageous child, had shattered every wall she'd built. Emma, Judge Foster said, her voice cracking on the name, She paused, fighting for composure and losing the battle. "Sweetheart, you have shown more bravery today than I have seen in my entire career. You faced your fear. You told your truth. You did what so many adults couldn't do." The tears were flowing freely now, tracking down the judge's cheeks. She made no attempt to hide them. "Do you know what real courage is?" Judge Foster continued, leaning forward so she was closer to Emma's level. "It's not being unafraid. It's being terrified, absolutely terrified, and doing the hard thing anyway. That's what you did today." Emma's own tears started again, but they were different this time. Not tears of fear or trauma, but of relief, of release, of something that might eventually become healing. "But I couldn't have done it without Bravo," Emma said, "and I couldn't have had Bravo without you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for letting me have my friend." Judge Foster pressed her hand to her mouth, unable to speak for a moment. In the jury box, 3 jurors were openly weeping. The court reporter had abandoned her machine entirely, reaching for tissues. Even the bailiff, a tough ex-Marine who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, was wiping his eyes. At the defense table, Marcus Webb stared down at his papers, his jaw tight. Beside him, Derek Thompson's expression had finally changed. The cold mask had slipped, replaced by something that might have been shame or fear, or the dawning realization that his fate had been sealed by a 7-year-old girl and her dog. At the prosecution table, Jennifer Lawson had her hand over her heart, tears streaming down her face. She'd won cases before, big cases, important cases, but nothing had ever felt like this. In the gallery, Rosa Martinez was sobbing into her hands, her whole body shaking. Miguel reached up from his wheelchair to grip her arm, his own face wet with tears. Around them, victim advocates, legal observers, reporters, everyone was moved beyond professional distance. Judge Foster finally found her voice again. "No, Emma," she shook her head, smiling through her tears. "You don't need to thank me. I should be thanking you. You reminded me why I became a judge, why I do this work. You reminded me that justice isn't just about laws and procedures. It's about protecting people like you, giving voice to the voiceless, making sure the truth can be heard." She paused, then added softly, "You didn't need Bravo to be brave, sweetheart. You were already brave. He just helped you remember that." Emma looked at Bravo, who sat perfectly still, his brown eyes moving between the girl and the judge as if he understood every word. "I think," Emma said thoughtfully, "we helped each other remember." The wisdom in those words, from a 7-year-old who'd survived trauma that would break most adults, struck everyone in the courtroom with the force of revelation. Judge Foster had to look away for a moment, composing herself as much as possible. When she looked back, she said, "Emma Martinez, you are extraordinary. Don't you ever forget that." Emma nodded, then did something that made even the hardest hearts in the room melt. She gave a small, formal curtsy, something she'd probably learned in school, and said, "Thank you, Judge Marion." Then she turned and walked back to her mother, Bravo at her side, Sarah following with her own tears flowing freely. Rosa swept Emma into her arms, holding her so tightly it seemed she'd never let go. Miguel reached out from his wheelchair, his hands touching his daughter's hair, his wife's back, pulling his family together. Judge Foster called a 15-minute recess, but it was several minutes before she could stand. She sat at the bench, openly weeping, not caring who saw, not caring what it meant for her professional image. Some moments transcended professionalism. This was one of them. When court reconvened 3 hours later, after closing arguments had been delivered, the jury deliberated for just 47 minutes, nearly a record. They returned with their verdict, and the forewoman stood with tears in her eyes. "We find the defendant, Derek Thompson, guilty on all counts: attempted murder, armed robbery, aggravated assault." Derek Thompson showed no emotion as he was led away in handcuffs, but his eyes found Emma one last time in the gallery. She didn't look away. She sat between her parents, Bravo's head on her lap, and stared back at him with a strength that hadn't existed 8 months ago. He was the one who looked away first. The end.